The Royal Navy, a force once unrivaled, entered the Second World War burdened by the heavy ghost of past imperial glories and the tangible weight of outdated technology. The fleet's capital ships, while numerous, included many vessels designed and built before the technological upheavals of the Great War, making them vulnerable anachronisms in a new, brutal age of naval combat. Grand old battlecruisers like HMS Hood, though beloved by the British public and awe-inspiring in size, possessed critical, fatal flaws in their protection schemes, especially against the deadly threat of plunging fire. Budgetary constraints during the harsh interwar period prioritized keeping a large quantity of ships afloat over conducting the expensive, essential modernization necessary to truly keep pace with the new construction of foreign naval powers. This chronic lack of continuous and essential investment meant that vital systems like fire control, gun stabilization, and anti-aircraft defenses remained stubbornly analog and visually reliant, a serious handicap in the face of rapidly developing enemy electronics. The sheer volume of older tonnage seemed to prove the German point: quantity of old steel was demonstrably no match for the quality and modernity of focused, new design. The sailors who served aboard these aging behemoths were steeped in tradition and legendary seamanship, but even the best training cannot fundamentally compensate for fundamentally obsolete equipment in a modern, unforgiving war. This quiet erosion of technological superiority was not lost on Britain's adversaries, who saw in the vast, proud Royal Navy a slow-moving target ripe for exploitation and a strategic invitation. The German Naval Command looked across the North Sea at the immense, yet visibly aging, British fleet and saw not an insurmountable obstacle, but an opportunity for a decisive, swift strategic defeat. Their captains were quick to mock the British obsession with preserving these relic vessels, dismissing them as museum pieces that belonged to a bygone era of slow-motion battles and gentlemen's warfare. The technological chasm, in their view, was so wide that it rendered the Royal Navy's numerical superiority practically meaningless in any meaningful, head-to-head engagement. They confidently believed that their own modern designs could easily outrun or outfight any of the Royal Navy's older, heavier, and slower units when the time for confrontation finally arrived. This deep-seated technological arrogance was a core part of the German naval doctrine, focusing heavily on a belief in the superior engineering and armored protection of their newest warships. They failed to appreciate that the British were not resting on their laurels but were instead undertaking a silent, profound revolution in the less glamorous fields of electrical engineering and information warfare. The British Navy's seemingly desperate reliance on its older ships was about to be secretly overturned by an invention that would change naval history forever, unseen and unheard by the overconfident German captains. The stage was being meticulously set for a battle where the true combat would occur not only in the water but in the ethereal realm of electromagnetic waves and unseen, long-distance electronic detection. The German Kriegsmarine, meticulously reconstructed in the deep shadow of the restrictive Versailles Treaty, represented the absolute zenith of interwar naval design and a direct, calculated challenge to centuries of British sea power. Their new warships, especially the magnificent battleship Bismarck, were built upon the foundational belief that speed, armor, and fire control systems must all be perfectly integrated to create an almost unsinkable war machine. German naval architects spared no expense in creating a heavily armored, immensely powerful ship with an incredible speed, exceeding that of many contemporary battleships, allowing her to outrun almost any opponent she could not instantly destroy. The Bismarck's armor belt was immensely thick and cleverly layered, designed to absorb punishment from any shell the aging British fleet could possibly field, a testament to the belief in impregnability that permeated the German high command. Her main armament consisted of 8 massive 15-inch guns, capable of delivering devastating broadsides over truly prodigious distances, a terrifying expression of the new, aggressive German naval strategy. Crucially, the German fire control systems, utilizing complex, stabilized optical rangefinders and sophisticated analog computers, were widely regarded as the best in the world, capable of achieving lethal accuracy over immense, unobserved ranges. This technological focus fostered an aggressive confidence and a sense of unchallenged superiority among German captains, who viewed their new ships as fundamentally and incontestably better than anything the British could oppose them with. They proudly saw the Bismarck not just as a ship of the line, but as a technological statement, a floating, mobile declaration that the long era of British naval dominance, built on Victorian-era designs, was definitively and finally over. The German naval staff openly ridiculed the British continued use of battlecruisers like Hood, pointing out the well-known weaknesses in their deck armor, which they correctly perceived as a critical and fatal design flaw. They were convinced that any confrontation would quickly turn into a rout, with the Bismarck's crushing firepower and superb protection guaranteeing a swift and decisive German victory. The sheer technological gap, they believed, was a shield and a sword that perfectly complemented the high morale and aggressive operational doctrine of the new Kriegsmarine commanders. Every metric, from the thickness of the steel to the precision of the rangefinders, suggested an overwhelming German advantage that could not be overcome by sheer force of numbers or traditional British seamanship alone. The commissioning of the Bismarck signaled the birth of a terrifying new apex predator of the sea, one whose power seemed perfectly suited to the ruthless, fast-paced nature of modern naval combat and ocean raiding. This supreme confidence, while seemingly justified by the ship's imposing specifications and initial performance, ultimately led to a fatal intellectual blind spot, blinding them to the possibility of an equally profound, yet completely different, kind of technological leap occurring elsewhere. They failed to realize that the most important weapons in the coming battle would not be made of steel, but of glass, vacuum tubes, and an entirely new understanding of the electromagnetic spectrum. While the formidable German fleet proudly flaunted its magnificent steel behemoths in the northern harbors, a quiet, profound revolution was meticulously underway in the secretive British workshops and unassuming coastal laboratories, far from the public eye. This British research prioritized invisible, electromagnetic waves over the traditional metric of thick steel plate, creating a technological leap that became the single most critical factor in the rapid, necessary modernization of the Royal Navy. The clandestine development and extremely rapid, prioritized deployment of radar or radio direction finding offered a silent, subtle, and ultimately devastating counter to the Bismarck's celebrated armored might and optical fire control. Starting from the rudimentary CH and later the more refined and capable Type 284 sets, British engineers tirelessly worked to miniaturize and harden the extremely delicate electronic equipment for reliable use aboard the violently pitching, rolling warships in the unforgiving North Atlantic. This powerful new electronic eye allowed British vessels to flawlessly detect, accurately track, and then actively engage enemy ships from distances far exceeding the visual horizon and through the densest of fog or the darkest of nights, fundamentally eliminating the enemy's element of surprise. Crucially, this indispensable radar information was then painstakingly integrated with the ship's older, but now digitally assisted, fire control systems, allowing the main guns to be laid and fired with deadly, unprecedented precision at targets completely unseen by human spotters. Older battleships and cruisers were immediately pulled into dry docks for frantic, priority refits, receiving these new electronic suites that transformed them overnight from visually reliant fighting ships into truly all-weather, 24-hour hunters of the sea. The modernization effort was decidedly not cosmetic, it was a deep, systemic overhaul that valued information dominance and long-range, non-visual accuracy above all else, secretly arming the aging fleet with a decisive operational advantage that no amount of German armor could possibly negate. The Germans, utterly reliant on their superior, but still ultimately visual, optical rangefinders, were completely ignorant of the electronic eyes that were now scanning the horizon for them, day and night, regardless of the turbulent weather conditions. The British had successfully achieved a massive, unannounced technological flank, turning their supposedly obsolete fleet into a network of highly sensitive and interconnected electronic sensors, ready to close the distance without ever being seen. This quiet technological leap, executed under the utmost secrecy, was the ultimate, unseen response to the German scorn, setting the final stage for a critical conflict where information, not just metal, would prove the single, most decisive factor in determining the ultimate victor. The future of the sea battle was destined to be fought in the invisible space between the ships, a territory the Germans had entirely failed to anticipate or even begin to comprehend in their singular focus on superior mechanical engineering. The successful, widespread integration of radar and other new command technologies demanded a corresponding and immediate revolution in naval doctrine, requiring a new generation of leadership capable of embracing radical, unprecedented change. Admirals like Sir John Tovey, the resolute commander-in-chief of the Home Fleet, understood with perfect clarity that simply installing new equipment was not remotely enough to guarantee victory. The entire operational strategy for command, control, and coordination of the diverse naval assets needed complete and immediate transformation. The key strategic shift involved elevating the long-neglected fleet air arm and the vulnerable, yet information-rich, reconnaissance aircraft into primary, indispensable components of the entire naval task force, acknowledging their vital role as long-range scouts and ultimate deciders. Carrier operations, which provided the crucial combination of massive search radius and decisive torpedo strike power, became central to the new war-fighting philosophy, transforming the aircraft carrier from a support vessel into the ultimate hunter-killer platform. Tovey and his most forward-thinking peers championed the extremely aggressive and continuous use of radar to maintain constant, non-visual contact with the enemy, ensuring that the hunting fleet could conserve precious fuel and perfectly stage their attack without ever losing the precise location of their quarry. Furthermore, the new doctrine mandated the rapid convergence of disparate forces, often involving battleships, cruisers, and aircraft carriers operating in highly coordinated pincer movements across thousands of square miles of unforgiving ocean. This required a level of complex, real-time communication and decentralized, autonomous decision-making that was a world away from the rigid, centralized command structures of earlier naval eras, demanding trust in junior officers and local intelligence. The operational training was rapidly updated to prioritize the interpretation of the new, sometimes ambiguous radar data over the traditional reliance on visual sightings and flags, fundamentally changing the way captains fought their ships. These forward-thinking leaders demonstrated that the Royal Navy possessed the essential intellectual flexibility to instantly match its newfound technological prowess, transforming a traditional, rigid force into a modern, adaptive, highly coordinated, and lethal fighting machine. They were ready to execute a complex, drawn-out hunt with a cold, ruthless efficiency that relied heavily on advanced coordination rather than simply individual ship strength, a marked departure from old-world naval traditions. The combined force now represented an unprecedented fusion of old, proven steel and new, cutting-edge electronics, fully prepared to outmaneuver and overwhelm the German single-ship raiding strategy with a coordinated response of immense, concentrated power. The fate of the Bismarck would ultimately be decided not by a single duel between two great ships, but by the relentless, coordinated action of an entire, electronically linked fleet, operating under a completely new, more sophisticated set of rules. Operation Rheinübung was strategically conceived as a devastating psychological and logistical stroke against the British war effort, aiming to cripple the vital Atlantic convoy system that desperately sustained the besieged island nation with necessary supplies. In the late spring of May 1941, the massive German spearhead, comprised of the state-of-the-art battleship Bismarck and the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen, slipped out of the Baltic under the secure cover of fog and a cloak of meticulously planned deception and misdirection. The German strategy was a classic commerce raiding plan, relying entirely on the immense speed and overwhelming firepower of the Bismarck to obliterate any convoy escorts, allowing the Prinz Eugen to then wreak utter havoc on the defenseless merchant ships following behind. The German naval command believed with great confidence that their powerful, fast ships could easily evade the clumsy, supposedly outdated British pursuit forces, disappearing quickly into the vastness of the Atlantic after striking their deadly, surprising blows. They expected to exploit the immense operational distances of the Atlantic, leveraging the vastness of the ocean to simply outrun and outmaneuver any attempts at interception by the slower, more heavily burdened British fleet units. However, the British intelligence network, utilizing both human sources and advanced signals interception, was already frustratingly one step ahead, tracking the raiders from the crucial moment they entered the open sea via the Danish Straits. Persistent, long-range reconnaissance patrols, including vital sightings by neutral Swedish aircraft and patrolling British cruisers, ensured that the precise location of the German task force was relayed to the Admiralty with alarming speed and precision. This immediate awareness of the breakout triggered a massive, high-priority naval scramble, diverting every available warship, regardless of its current mission, to converge on the likely breakout points and block the expected passage. The German officers, still supremely confident in their ship's speed and stealth, were entirely unaware of the extensive and highly coordinated surveillance net that was slowly but surely drawing its circle around them. The sheer scale of the British response proved that the surveillance net was far more extensive and coordinated than the Germans had ever dreamed possible, mobilizing the entire home fleet and a massive contingent of cruisers to force an early engagement. The element of surprise, which the Germans had counted on for their long-term success, was instantly and completely neutralized by the vigilance and rapid intelligence gathering of the British command structure. The stage was thus set for the defining naval confrontation of the entire European war, a desperate, high-stakes race to intercept the most powerful warship afloat before it could unleash its destructive potential on the critical, vulnerable Atlantic supply lanes. The shocking encounter in the Denmark Strait on the cold, grey morning of May 24, 1941, delivered the German High Command their most profound, but tragically misleading, moment of triumph and ultimate validation. The immediate interception force, led by the beloved battlecruiser HMS Hood, the enduring, iconic symbol of British naval might, engaged the Bismarck at close, unforgiving range in a high-stakes duel, hoping to stop the breakout before it began. The ensuing firefight, though incredibly brief and violent, brutally exposed the fatal, inherent design flaws of the older British ship, which was heavily armored only at the sides and notoriously vulnerable to the deadly threat of plunging shellfire from above. The Bismarck's gunnery was immediately and devastatingly accurate, utilizing its superior, stabilized fire control to perfectly bracket the British flagship within mere minutes of the first few salvos being fired. A shell from the Bismarck, believed to be the fifth salvo from her main guns, struck the Hood with absolutely catastrophic effect, penetrating the thin deck armor and reaching the aft main magazine below, triggering an explosion of unimaginable and horrifying scale. The resulting blast tore the massive, 42,000-ton battlecruiser into two immense pieces, sinking the legendary Hood in less than 3 minutes and taking with her all but 3 of her crew of over 1,400 men, an utterly crushing and instantaneous loss. The total and spectacular annihilation of the pride of the Royal Navy by the German newcomer seemed to fully confirm the German captain's earlier disdain, powerfully validating their faith in modern, superior design and undeniable technological superiority. This initial German victory was a monumental shock to the British nation and a massive propaganda coup for the Nazis, seemingly proving that the old Imperial Navy was indeed a relic of a bygone past and no match for the new masters of the sea. The jubilation aboard the Bismarck was profound and immediate, a moment of supreme, arrogant confidence that they had decisively won the opening round and were now free to complete their deadly mission against the vulnerable convoys. They failed to consider that the sinking of the Hood had not demoralized their adversary but instead had utterly enraged the entire British war machine, transforming the hunt into a single-minded, unstoppable quest for immediate, total retribution. The shattering news of the HMS Hood's spectacular and rapid sinking reverberated throughout the Admiralty and the entire British nation, instantly shifting the nature of the Bismarck's pursuit from a mere strategic hunt to a personal, national mission of necessary vengeance and existential priority. The sudden, colossal loss was a staggering blow to the already fragile British morale, but instead of inducing panic or surrender, it galvanized the entire military establishment with a fierce, unified resolve to exact immediate and complete retribution on the German raider. Winston Churchill's famously terse, unwavering, and emotional order, simply stating, "Sink the Bismarck," was not a mere tactical suggestion. It was an emotional decree that instantly unlocked the full, unbridled, and collective power of the converging Royal Navy assets across the entire North Atlantic theater. The German command, still basking in the glow of their great, propaganda-fueled victory, made a critical strategic error in judgment, believing their main task was now simply to evade the remaining pursuit force and reach the relative safety of the French coast for immediate repairs and resupply. They drastically and fatally underestimated the profound psychological shock and the resulting, cold efficiency of the entire, galvanized British naval apparatus, now entirely freed from the past cautious, traditionalist approach of the earlier command structures. Every available warship, from the largest battleships and most crucial aircraft carriers to the smallest cruisers and fastest destroyers, was instantly rerouted and pushed to its maximum operational limit to converge on the German battleship's expected path of retreat. This massive, unprecedented mobilization demonstrated the sheer, overwhelming scale of the Royal Navy's immense logistical and command superiority, a concentration of overwhelming force that was entirely beyond the capability of the lone German raider to withstand or possibly evade. The hunt immediately became a relentless, single-minded closure, with the entire British forces determined to use every modern advantage at their disposal to ensure that the Bismarck's early, crushing success would be her defining and final, fatal operational mistake. The vast operational area of the Atlantic was suddenly shrinking under the coordinated pressure of the converging British task forces, whose movements were now synchronized with minute-by-minute accuracy based on continuous aerial reconnaissance and electronic tracking. The final hours of the Bismarck's operational life had begun with the collective determination of an entire nation focusing its rage and immense naval power on one single, massive target. The fleeting moment of German triumph quickly evaporated when the pursuit transformed into a clinical, merciless demonstration of superior electronic warfare, definitively highlighting the decisive, critical advantage of modern British radar technology. Following the brutal Denmark Strait battle, the Bismarck managed to violently shake off her immediate pursuers in the chaos of the sinking, leading to a crucial, tense period of intense, desperate searching by the scattered British forces across the featureless, vast ocean. It was here that the previously mocked, rapidly modernized electronic equipment aboard the British ships and aircraft proved its invaluable, decisive worth, replacing human fallibility and severely limited sight with the relentless, unblinking electronic eye of high-frequency radar. The critical persistence of the patrol aircraft, particularly a slow, unglamorous PBY Catalina flying boat equipped with the new ASV, air-to-surface vessel, radar, became the singular key to accurately relocating the German battleship after it had made the fatal error of breaking radio silence for a brief, critical communication. This specialized radar, initially designed for the arduous task of anti-submarine warfare, successfully detected the massive surface target from a distance far beyond visual range, providing the exact, updated position that allowed the surface hunters to precisely vector in for the final, inevitable closure. The German crew, still supremely confident in their ship's immense speed and its ability to outrun pursuit, were entirely oblivious to the continuous, electronic sweep of the British equipment, completely unaware that they were being perfectly tracked and constantly shadowed with complete, non-visual precision. This unceasing electronic watch, maintained successfully through the immense operational distances and the increasingly stormy weather of the Atlantic, completely shattered the Bismarck's belief in its own stealth and its ability to maneuver freely without observation. The new British technology had decisively negated the German ship's superior speed and its celebrated armor, turning what should have been a frantic, impossible search into a predictable, entirely inevitable interception course, sealing the German flagship's fate with unseen and unrelenting accuracy. The electronic shadow of the Royal Navy had successfully closed, and the Bismarck was no longer the hunter, but a fixed, known, and unmoving target in the crosshairs of an electronically superior enemy. The penultimate, crippling blow to the Bismarck was delivered by an element of the Royal Navy that was, ironically, as old-fashioned and visually anachronistic as the vessels the German captains had once derided, the slow, fabric-covered fairy swordfish biplanes of the Fleet Air Arm. These slow, cloth and wire planes, universally considered completely obsolete by all contemporary aviation standards, launched a final, desperate torpedo attack from the rolling deck of the aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal in a violent gale and near-gale conditions, demonstrating immense pilot skill. The sheer audacity and terrifying bravery of the pilots, flying their vulnerable biplanes through abysmal, dangerous weather with limited visibility, was matched only by the critical, modern weapon they carried, the aerial torpedo, specifically designed to strike the ship's vulnerable underwater hull below the main, thick armor belt. The Bismarck's advanced anti-aircraft gunners, operating the latest German flak cannons, found the slow-moving, low-flying swordfish a uniquely difficult and frustrating target to track and engage effectively, struggling to depress their powerful modern cannons sufficiently to target the biplane's low-altitude approach. Through a mixture of sheer, unyielding determination and a touch of wartime luck in the chaotic weather, one of the torpedoes from the final, coordinated attack struck the Bismarck's stern in a critical location, a vital hit that did not sink the ship outright but had a far more devastating and decisive impact on the ensuing battle. The immediate detonation completely and irrevocably jammed the battleship's massive twin rudders in a hard-over position, instantly stripping the colossal warship of its maneuverability and forcing it into a slow, futile turn to port with no means of correction. This single, critical, and perfectly placed blow, delivered by an utterly outdated aircraft carrying a modern weapon, instantly rendered the Bismarck a massive, unsteerable, and drifting hulk, a wounded giant entirely incapable of changing its direction or escaping the converging British fleet. The power of the great ship was suddenly, completely meaningless, as it was now a fixed, immobile target, effectively signing the death warrant for the pride of the German fleet with a simple, submerged strike from an unseen depth. The mockery of the old planes was now silent, replaced by the grim reality that even the most modern armor could not save a ship that could no longer steer or evade the relentless, closing British pursuit. With its massive rudders irrevocably jammed and its steering entirely disabled, the magnificent battleship Bismarck was transformed from a terrifying hunter into a helpless, crippled prey, beginning a slow, agonizing dance of death across the increasingly stormy North Atlantic. The frantic, desperate efforts of the German crew, working in the flooded, inaccessible stern compartments to free the massive rudder assembly, were immediately and completely defeated by the immense, unrelenting water pressure and the severity of the structural damage, confirming the hopelessness of their mechanical plight. Captain Ernst Lindemann and his command staff were reluctantly forced to accept the brutal, immediate truth: the most powerful, heavily armored warship in the world was now entirely at the mercy of the wind, the heavy sea, and the relentless, closing British net, utterly incapable of escaping its fate. The British forces, led by the massive battleships King George V and Rodney, and a close flotilla of swift destroyers, closed in with cold, methodical precision, utilizing their superior radar-derived positional certainty to perfectly stage the final, crushing confrontation. The approaching British warships knew exactly where the Bismarck was located and, more critically, knew precisely what direction it was now forced to travel, effectively eliminating all elements of surprise and tactical maneuver for the stricken German vessel. The German High Command, receiving the grim, desperate reports via increasingly strained radio communications, could only watch in despair and horror as their prized flagship, once deemed utterly unsinkable and technologically supreme, was slowly and inevitably reduced to a magnificent, unmoving target. The tragic sight of the massive ship, rolling heavily in the mountainous waves and steaming in tight, desperate, futile circles, was the ultimate, tragic symbol of the profound failure of pure, thick armor to defeat the strategic combination of technological innovation and coordinated, modern air power. The time for arrogant mockery and confident disdain for their enemy's aging fleet was definitively over. The time for the final, ruthless judgment, delivered by a technologically superior adversary, had inevitably arrived on the cold, grey horizon. The massive ship, unable to respond to her helm, became a predictable point on a map, a fatal concentration of the German reliance on single-ship power over the sophisticated, networked command structure of their adversary. The final, brutal confrontation on the cold, wet morning of May 27, 1941, was a stark, conclusive masterclass in the operational superiority of the modernized Royal Navy, a perfect, textbook execution of the new, radar-centric naval doctrine. The battleships HMS King George V and HMS Rodney approached the crippled Bismarck from multiple, tactically superior angles, utilizing their superior speed and the all-weather accuracy of their integrated radar systems to completely dictate the overwhelming terms of the final engagement. Opening fire at immense, previously considered impossible range, the British battleships achieved lethal accuracy almost immediately, their initial salvos landing with a devastating rapidity that instantly overwhelmed the surviving German fire control, which was hampered by the ship's erratic motion and severe battle damage. Shell after shell, precisely guided by the invisible electronic tracking of the radar, slammed into the Bismarck's exposed superstructure, systematically destroying the command and control centers and silencing the main, massive 15-inch turrets in terrifying, rapid succession. The Bismarck celebrated thick armor proved completely incapable of withstanding the relentless, concentrated torrent of heavy, accurate shellfire, and the proud ship was quickly transformed into a blazing, smoking, unmoving wreck in the cold morning light. The British gunnery was not only stunningly accurate but was also sustained and overwhelming, a continuous, coordinated deluge of heavy shells that neutralized the German ship's ability to fight back within the first half-hour of the close-range engagement. The secondary British forces, including cruisers and destroyers, moved in to deliver the final, crushing blows with both torpedoes and additional shellfire, ensuring that the German ship could not, under any circumstances, be salvaged or towed to safety. This final, one-sided slaughter proved conclusively and forever that superior fire control, enabled by modern radar and coordinated targeting, was exponentially more valuable and decisive than sheer, brute thickness of armor plate in the new, fast-paced age of total naval warfare. The mocking laughter of the German captains had been definitively silenced by the cold, hard precision of the Royal Navy's modernization efforts, delivered by the relentless, coordinated guns of the entire British fleet. The destruction of the massive battleship Bismarck was definitively more than a single, high-stakes battle victory. It was a profound, irreversible watershed moment that instantly altered the entire course of naval warfare and firmly validated the wisdom of the quiet, patient modernization of the Royal Navy. The spectacular sinking was a powerful, brutal, and essential lesson to all navies worldwide that a ship's protection and raw offensive power were no longer the sole, ultimate determinants of its survival or its effectiveness on the open sea. The critical ability to find, accurately track, and then cripple the enemy using advanced, network technology had suddenly become the paramount, indispensable requirement for any successful major naval operation. The operational success of the British, achieved through the coordinated use of long-range radar, decisive aircraft carrier strikes, and modernized fire control systems, proved the undeniable, indispensable worth of air power and electronics in the naval sphere, relegating the battleship to a secondary role. The German High Command, entirely shaken by the loss of their prized warship, immediately and drastically curtailed the operational use of their other remaining capital ships for independent raiding operations, a crucial strategic shift that relieved immense, critical pressure on the vital Atlantic convoys. The entire episode forced a deep, painful re-evaluation of naval doctrine across the globe, with every nation recognizing that the traditional age of the massive, single, self-sufficient battleship was now rapidly drawing to a conclusive and violent end. The enduring legacy of the Bismarck is not found in her immense armor or her crushing firepower, but in the tragic, ultimate lesson that technological flexibility, intellectual adaptability, and a courageous willingness to completely abandon outdated doctrine will always triumph over static pride and the grand, glorious tradition of the past. The magnificent wreck of the battleship, now a silent, somber monument resting deep on the cold ocean floor, stands as the ultimate, chilling proof that the most technologically advanced ship of a rapidly bygone era was ultimately doomed by a technologically superior, electronically adaptive adversary. The age of the aircraft carrier and the silent, invisible power of radar had definitively arrived, fundamentally changing the rules of engagement and the strategic landscape of the world's oceans forevermore.